Hi everyone. Welcome to Unit 3, The Need for Political Theory. Course, EPS 11 Political Ideas and Ideologies. Objectives of this course is to distinguish political theory from other similar terms. Discuss the different usages of political theory, viz., as the history of political thought, as a technique of analysis, etc. Examine whether political theory is dead. Here is a mind map diagram on the need for political theory, mind map diagram. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. Political theory is one of the core areas in political science. It is only in recent times that it has emerged as an academic discipline. Earlier, those who engaged in this enterprise styled themselves as philosophers or scientists. From ancient Greece to the present, the history of political theory has dealt with fundamental and perennial ideas of political science. The first modern usage of the term political science was in the works of Charles Louis de Sécoundi Montesquieu, 1689–1755, Adam Smith, 1723–90, Adam Ferguson, 1723–1816, and David Hume, 1711–76, where it meant the science of the legislator. Political theory is the most appropriate term to employ in designating that intellectual tradition which affirms the possibility of transcending the sphere of immediate practical concerns and viewing man's societal existence from a critical perspective. Political theory was political science in the full sense, and there could be no science without theory. Just as we may speak of theory as either the activity of theorizing, so political theory may legitimately and accurately be used as synonymous with political science. Here is a mind map diagram on political theory and other related terms. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. A distinction can be made between political theory and similar terms, such as political science, political philosophy and political ideology, though many treat them interchangeably. The differentiation between political theory and political science arises because of the general shift in intellectual perceptions brought about by modern science. Political science has tried to provide plausible generalizations and laws about politics and political behavior. Political theory reflects upon political phenomenon, processes and institutions and on actual political behavior by subjecting it to philosophical or ethical criterion. It considers the question of the best political order, which is a part of a larger and a more fundamental question, namely, the ideal form of life that a human being ought to lead within a larger community. In the process of answering immediate and local questions, it addresses perennial issues, which is why a study of the classical texts form an important component of the discipline. A classic in political theory has the essential ingredients of a great literary work, which in spite of its local setting, deals with the perennial problems of life and society. It contains the quintessence of eternal knowledge and is an inheritance not of any one culture, place, people or time, but of the entire humankind. Specific political theories cannot be considered as the correct or final understanding of an event. The meaning of an event is always open to future interpretations from new viewpoints, each explaining and analyzing from a particular standpoint or concern in political life. Furthermore, political theory is critical in its endeavor, for it gives an account of politics that rises above those of ordinary people. There is no tension between political theory and political science, for they differ in terms of their boundaries and jurisdiction, and not in their aim. Political theory supplies ideas, concepts and theories for the purpose of analysis, description, explanation and criticism, which in turn are incorporated in political science. Political philosophy provides general answers to questions such as what is justice, concepts of right, the distinction between is and ought and the larger issues of politics. Political philosophy is a part of normative political theory, for it attempts to establish interrelationships between concepts. It is, perhaps, accurate to say that every political philosopher is a theorist, though every political theorist is not a political philosopher. Political philosophy is a complex activity, which is best understood by analyzing the many ways that the acknowledged masters have practiced it. No single philosopher in no one historical age can be said to have defined it conclusively, any more than any one painter or school of painting has practiced all that we mean by painting. Political thought is the thought of the whole community that includes the writings and speeches of the articulate sections such as professional politicians, political commentators, society reformers and ordinary persons of a community. Thought can be in the form of political treatises, scholarly articles, speeches, government policies and decisions, and also poems and prose that capture the anguish of the people. Thought is time-bound, for instance, the history of the 20th century. In short, political thought includes theories that attempt to explain political behavior, and values to evaluate it and methods to control it. Political theory, unlike thought, refers to the speculation by a single individual, usually articulated in treatises as models of explanation. It consists of theories of institutions, including that of the state, law, representation and of election. The mode of inquiry is comparative and explanatory. Political theory attempts to explain the attitudes and actions arising from ordinary political life and to generalize about them in a particular context. This political theory is concerned about with the relationships between concepts and circumstances. Political philosophy attempts to resolve or to understand conflicts between political theories, which might appear equally acceptable in given circumstances. Political ideology is a systematic and all-embracing doctrine, which attempts to give a complete and universally applicable theory of human nature and society along with a detailed program of attaining it. John Locke is often described as the father of modern ideologies. Marxism is also a classic example of an ideology summed up in the statement that the purpose of philosophy is to change and not merely interpret the world. All political ideology is political philosophy, though the reverse is not true. The 20th century has seen many ideologies like fascism, Nazism, communism, and liberalism. A distinctive trait of political ideology is its dogmatism, which unlike political philosophy, precludes and discourages critical appraisal because of its aim to realize the perfect society. According to Gamine and Sabine, political ideology is a negation of political theory because an ideology is of recent origin, and under the influence of positivism is based on subjective, unverifiable value preferences. Gamine, furthermore, distinguishes a political theorist from a publicist. According to him, while the former has a profound understanding of issues, the latter is concerned with immediate questions. Furthermore, Germano, like Plato, also distinguishes between opinion and knowledge, the latter being the starting point of a political theorist. Every political theorist has a dual role, that of a scientist and a philosopher, and the way he divides his roles will depend on his temperament and interests. Only by combining the two roles can he contribute to knowledge in a worthwhile manner. The scientific component of a theory can appear coherent and significant, if the author has a preconceived notion of the aims of political life. The philosophical basis is revealed in the manner in which reality is depicted. Political theory is dispassionate and disinterested. As a science, it describes political reality without trying to pass judgment on what is being depicted either implicitly or explicitly. As a philosophy, it prescribes rules of conduct which will secure a good life for all in the society and not simply for certain individuals or classes. The theorist will not himself have a personal interest in the political arrangements of any one country or class or party. Devoid of such an interest, his vision of reality and his image of the good life will not be clouded, nor will his theory be special. The intention of an ideology is to justify a particular system of power in society. The ideologue is an interested party. His interest may be to defend things as they are or to criticize the status quo in the hope that a new distribution of power will come into being. Rather than disinterested prescription, we love rationalization. Rather than dispassionate description, we have a distorted picture of reality. Here is a question with answer. You can pause the video at any time to go through them in detail. Here is a mind map diagram on usages of political theory. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. Political theorists since Aristotle try to define the political to understand political practices and their application. Aristotle's remarks that man is a political animal takes account of the inherent human desire for society and the fact that human beings need and can find fulfillment only through a political community. For Aristotle, the political is important for it stands for a common political space in which all citizens participate. However, the ambit of politics has to be limited. The political dimension of political theory concerns itself with the form, nature, organization of the state or government and its relationship with the individual citizen. Though interlinked, the political is treated as a specific area distinct and different from the other spheres like the economy and culture. This is the primary focus of the liberal tradition. On the contrary, Marxism categorically rejects the liberal distinction between the political and the non-political by arguing that political power is a handmaiden of economic power. It identifies affinity between the economic power and the state, as the history of political thought. Usually, courses in political theory offer a detailed and elaborate study of books or particular political philosophies, from Plato to contemporary times, from a historical perspective. These books are studied for their normative statements about the desirability of certain types of institutions, governments and laws, which are usually accompanied by rational arguments. The classics are portrayed as timeless in quality, permanent in relevance and universal in their significance. In the course of analyzing texts from a historical perspective, it is important to see how a particular idea or concept has evolved in the course of time, and the different meanings and interpretations it has been subjected to. While it is important to know who said something for the first time, it is equally important to know the new ramifications of an idea or a concept. It is for this reason that Wolin rightly describes the history of political theory as marked by both continuity and innovation, as a technique of analysis. Aristotle's remarks that the individual is a political animal indicates the primacy of politics and the fact that political thinking takes place at various levels and in a variety of ways. The political in such a view not only becomes all-pervasive, but the highest kind of activity. Politics symbolizes a collective public life wherein people create institutions that regulate their common life. Even deceptively simple common-sense questions and political opinion merit an answer. For instance, are individuals equal? Is the state more important than the individual? How to justify violence employed by the state? Is this an inherent tension between freedom and equality? Is the minority justified in dictating terms to the majority and vice versa? One's response to these statements often reflect what ought to be the case rather than what is the case. At stake here is a choice between values and ideals. By exercising one's preferences, one also inadvertently subscribes to a political ideology, which means that answers to questions will vary not only according to individual opinion. It is because of this basic reason that political theory is to be a part of an open society, for there would always be liberals and conservatives training in political theory who would help one to answer the aforesaid questions logically, speculatively and critically. As a conceptual clarification, political theory helps to understand the concepts and terms used in a political argument and analysis, like the meaning of freedom, equality, democracy, justice and rights. These terms are not only frequently used in daily conversation, but also in political theory discourse. An understanding of these terms is important, for it helps one to know the way these terms have been employed, the shifts in their definition and their usage in a structure of argument. Many, like Weldon, stress on the need to scrutinize concepts in ordinary pre-theoretical language. Analyses of concepts also reveal the ideological commitment of a speaker or and writer. Liberals define freedom as implying choice, absence of restraints, while socialists like freedom with equality. Liberals define a state as an instrument of human welfare, while for a socialist a state is an instrument of oppression, domination and class privileges. Conceptual classification is definitely possible, but cannot be neutral. Those engaged in it overtly or covertly subscribe to value preferences, and in this sense their task is not different from the authors of classics and political theory who help one to understand the underlying basis of human, political and moral actions, as formal model building. This perception is particularly popular in the United States, for it considers political theory as an exercise in devising formal models of political processes, similar to the ones in theoretical economics. These models serve two purposes. First, they are explanatory, offering systematically the factors on which political processes are based. Second, they are normative, for they try to show the consequences that accrue from following a certain rule. A good example of such an exercise is Anthony Downs' theory of electoral competition, which perceives voters as trying to gain maximum utility from an election result and parties as teams trying to maximize their probability of winning. Downs then shows how parties, in order to win, devise ideological stances. Another important model is Kenneth Arrow's impossibility theorem, which states that among other things being equal, where a democratic choice has to be made between more than two alternatives, the outcome would very likely be an arbitrary one and influenced by the procedure employed to exercise the choice. Joseph Schumpeter's elitist theory of democracy is based on the assumption that a human being takes his economic life more seriously than his political one. As theoretical political science, the emergence of political science in the 20th century has led some political scientists to look upon political theory as a mere theoretical branch of the discipline. An attempt is made to integrate empirical observations with a systematic explanation of one's everyday experiences in the world. This view dispenses with the normative content of traditional political theory. Though mere explanation of political phenomena is possible, but grounding it in empiricism is not adequate. Any attempt to formulate a political theory free of normative elements would inherently fail. This is because any explanation of political events would mean an interpretation of the intentions and motives of the participants, and such an interpretation would bring forth normative issues. Here is a question with answer. You can pause the video at any time to go through them in detail. Here is a mind map diagram on importance of key theoretical concepts. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. A reader getting introduced to political theory for the first time may think it sufficient to study the institutions rather than abstract concepts in order to understand the character and nature of society. While a study of institutions is possible, one has to realize that institutional arrangements vary from society to society because they are based on divergent sets of ideas. This realization takes us to the heart of the matter as to what is more important, reality or ideas, facts or concepts. Do ideas reflect reality, or is reality based on ideas? Here is a mind map diagram on Is Political Theory Dead? You can pause the video here to view it in detail. In the middle of the 20th century, many observers readily wrote an obituary of political theory. Some spoke of its decline. Others proclaimed its death. One referred to political theory as being in the doghouse. This dismal view is because the classical tradition in political theory is, by and large, loaded with value judgments beyond the control of empirical testing. The criticism of normative theory came from logical positivists in the 1930s and from behavioralism, subsequently. Easton contends that since political theory is concerned with some kind of historical form, it had lost its constructive role. He blames William Dunning, Charles H. Mulwayne, and George M. Sabine for historicism in political theory. This kind of political theory has dissuaded students from a serious study of value theory. In the past, theory was a vehicle whereby articulate and intelligent individuals conveyed their thoughts on actual direction of affairs and offered for serious consideration some ideas about the desirable course of events. In this way, they revealed to us the full meaning of their moral frame of reference. Today, however, the kind of historical interpretation with which we are familiar in the study of political theory has driven from the latter its only unique function, that of constructively approaching a valuational frame of reference. In the past, theory was approached as an intellectual activity whereby the student could learn how he was to go about exploring the knowable consequences and, through them, the ultimate premises of his own moral outlook. Scrutiny of the works by American political theorists reveals that their authors have been motivated less by an interest in communicating such knowledge than in retelling information about the meaning, internal consistency and historical development of past political values. Dunning in his 3 volumes entitled A History of Political Theories 1902 set the tone for research in political theory. This training as a historian enables him to approach political theory primarily as offering problems of historical change and to unfold the role of political ideas in this process. As a result, political theory, for Dunning, becomes a historical account of the conditions and consequences of political ideas. He seeks to uncover the cultural and political conceptions of an age and to isolate the influences of these ideas, in turn, on the social conditions. Easton describes Dunning as a historicist, for he deflects political theory from moral considerations and consciously avoids dealing with moral issues in a purely historical context. Dunning perceives political theory as essentially historical research into issues that arise from observation of political facts and practices. He confines his study to the legal rather than the ethical dimensions of political life, though subsequently his students broadened it to encompass theories of political activity. He considers moral views as a product of caprice, dogmas without justification and hence, not worthy of analysis or interpretation. He neglects the meaning and logical consistency of ideas. Mulwayne's The Growth of Political Thought in the West, 1932, uses historical research, for he regards political ideas as an effect rather than an influential interacting part of social activity. Being virtual ciphers in the changing patterns of actual life, ideas can have meaning only as a part of a history of theories in which ideas may condition subsequent ideas, but in which they leave no impact upon action. Political theory is construed here as a branch of the sociology of knowledge, which deals primarily with the circumstances shaping knowledge as it is varied over time. The task of the political theorist is to show the way in which a social milieu molds and shapes political thought. It is concerned with the exclusively empirical task of uncovering the determinants of ideology. Sabine's A History of Political Theory, 1939, has singularly influenced studies in political theory more than any other book written during the 30s. Like Dunning and Mulwayne, Sabine considers the historical study of theory as an appropriate approach to the subject matter. The impression that one gets from the book and from a description of his method is that a historical study of theory provides its own self-evident justification. Sabine combines the approach of both Dunning and Mulwayne. Like Dunning, he believes that political thought is a part of the political process which interacts and influences social action. He shares Mulwayne's belief that it is necessary to describe and analyze moral judgment in each theory as these are the determining factors in history and not mere rationalizations of an activity. Moral judgments are not inferior to factual propositions as Dunning contends. Though Sabine reiterates Dunning's interpretation of the relation between ideas and action, he differs in his conception of the nature of history of political theory by his emphasis on the role of ethical judgment. For Sabine, every political theory can be scrutinized from two points of view, as a social philosophy and as an ideology. As an ideology, theories are psychological phenomena precluding truth or falsity. Theories are beliefs, events in people's minds and factors in their conduct irrespective of their validity or verifiability. Theories play an influential role in history and therefore, the task of a historian is to ascertain the extent to which these theories help in shaping the course of history. A theory has to be examined for its meaning rather than for its impact on human actions. Viewed in this perspective, a theory comprises of two kinds of propositions, factual and moral. Sabine focuses on factual rather than moral statements, for the latter precludes descriptions of truth or falsity. He regards values as reflecting human preferences to some social and physical fact. They are not deducible from facts, nor can they be reduced to facts or nationally discovered as being expressions of emotions. Since political theory advances some statements of preference, value judgments form the case of theory and explain the reason for its existence. The moral element characterizes political theory, which is why it is primarily a moral enterprise. In spite of factual propositions within a theory, a political theory on the whole can hardly be true in depicting a particular episode or period. Easton examined the reasons for the decline of political theory in general and its decline into historicism in particular. First, and foremost, is the tendency among political scientists to conform to the moral propositions of their age, leading to a loss of the constructive approach. The emphasis is to uncover and reveal one's values, which imply that there is no longer the need to inquire into the merit of these moral values, but merely understand their origins, development and social impact. History is used to endorse existing values. Secondly, moral relativism is responsible for the attention a theory received with history. Here is a question with answer. You can pause the video at any time to go through them in detail. Here is a mind map diagram on revival of political theory. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. In the 1930s, political theory began studying the history of ideas with the purpose of defending liberal democratic theory in opposition to the totalitarian tenets of communism, fascism and Nazism. Lasswell tried to establish a scientific political theory with the eventual purpose of controlling human behavior, furthering the aims and direction given by Merriam. Unlike the classical tradition, scientific political theory describes rather than prescribes. Political theory in the traditional sense was alive in the works of Arendt, Theodor Adorno, Marcuse, and Leo Strauss. Their views diametrically differed from the broad ideas within American political science, for they believed in liberal democracy, science and historical progress. All of them reject political messianism and utopianism in politics. Arendt focused mainly on the uniqueness and responsibility of the human being, with which she initiates her criticism in behavioralism. She contended that the behavioral search for uniformities in human nature has only contributed towards stereotyping the human being. Strauss reaffirms the importance of classical political theory to remedy the crisis of the modern times. He does not agree with the proposition that all political theory is ideological in nature, mirroring a given socio-economic interest, for most political thinkers are motivated by the possibility of discerning the principles of the right order in social existence. A political philosopher has to be primarily interested in truth. Past philosophies are studied with an eye on coherence and consistency. The authors of the classics in political theory are superior because they were geniuses and measured in their writings. Strauss scrutinizes the methods and purposes of the new political science and concludes that it was defective when compared with classical political theory, particularly that of Aristotle. For Aristotle, a political philosopher or a political scientist has to be impartial, for he possesses a more comprehensive and clearer understanding of human ends. Political science and political philosophy are identical, because science consisting of theoretical and practical aspects is identical with philosophy. Aristotle's political science also evaluates political things, defends autonomy of prudence in practical matters and views political action as essentially ethical. These premises behavioralism denies, for it separates political philosophy from political science and substitutes the distinction between theoretical and practical sciences. It perceives applied sciences to be derived from theoretical sciences, but not in the same manner as the classical tradition visualizes. Behavioralism, like positivism, is disastrous, for it denies knowledge regarding ultimate principles. Their bankruptcy is evident, for they seem helpless, unable to distinguish the right from the wrong, the just from the unjust in view of the rise of totalitarianism. Strauss counters Easton's charge of historicism by alleging that the new science is responsible for the decline in political theory, for it pointed to and abetted the general political crisis of the West because of its overall neglect of normative issues. Vogelin regards political science and political theory as inseparable and that one is not possible without the other. Political theory is not ideology, utopia or scientific methodology, but an experiential science of the right order in both the individual and society. It has to dissect critically and empirically the problem of order. Theory is not just any opining about human existence and society, it rather is an attempt at formulating the meaning of existence by explicating the content of a definitive class of experiences. Its argument is not arbitrary, but derives its validity from the aggregate of experiences to which it must permanently refer for empirical control. Here is a mind map diagram on recent developments. You can pause the video here to view it in detail. Since the 70s, political theory has revived largely due to the efforts of Habermas, Nozick, and Rawls. The themes that figure prominently since its revival are broadly social justice and welfare rights theory within a deontological perspective, utilitarianism, democratic theory and pluralism, feminism, postmodernism, new social movements and civil society, and the liberalism communitarian debate. In fact, communitarianism has tried to fill the void left by the declining popularity of Marxism. However, this unprecedented lease of life that political theory has received is restricted to the academia, and as a result, it is a kind of alienated politics, an enterprise carried on at some distance from the activities to which it refers. This resurgence suggests that earlier pronouncements about its decline and/or demise are premature and academically short-sighted. However, one has to be careful in distinguishing contemporary political theory from the classical tradition. As the former derives its inspiration from the latter, and in this sense, they are attempts to refine rather than being original, adjusting the broad frameworks of the classical tradition to the contemporary complexities. This newfound enthusiasm has been confined to liberal political discourse, mainly due to the seminal work of Rawls fulfilling Germano's wish of a need to strengthen the open society. Recent liberal theory, in its revived sense, focuses on the idea of impartiality and fairness and the belief that discrimination must be grounded on relevant differences. It is no coincidence that a well-formulated and detailed analysis of the concept of justice, long overdue since the time of Plato, emerges in Rawls, for whom justice means fairness. Rawls in the classical tradition deals with what ought to be, for he confronted the vexed problem of distribution of liberties, opportunities, income, wealth and the basis of self-respect. Among the competing ideologies which ushers in the 20th century, only liberalism, unlike fascism and communism, permits free exchange of ideas. It synchronizes, and adapts if necessary, theory in light of practice and identifies the elements that constitute a just political and social order without being doctrinaire and dogmatic. Moreover, the loss of challenge by both fascism and communism, the first, because of its defeat in the Second World War, and the second, which collapsed due to its own internal contradictions, also prove that utopian and radical schemes are no longer theoretically and practically desirable and feasible alternatives. Nonetheless, liberalism faces challenges in recent times from communitarianism, postmodernism and feminism. Here is a question with answer. You can pause the video at any time to go through them in detail.